Hello, welcome to January 30th live stream devotional and Bible study. If I look a little bit lower today, it's because I am. I sat down on my couch here and it broke. so, anyways, I'm a little bit lower, but it's actually really comfy still, so I'm okay. Um, Today we're going to be reading through 1 Samuel chapter 14, and Jesus is calling for today. So let's just get started with Jesus is calling for January 30th, 2021. Worship me only. Whatever occupies your mind the most becomes your God. Worries, if indulged, develop into idols. Anxiety gains a life of its own, parasitically infesting your mind. Break free from this bondage by affirming your trust in me and refreshing yourself in my presence. What goes on in your mind is invisible, undetectable to other people. But I read your thoughts continually, searching for evidence of trust in me. I rejoice when your mind turns toward me. Guard your thoughts diligently. Good thought choices will keep you close to me. And that was inspired by 3 different Bible verses. He will have no fear of bad news. His heart is steadfast, trusting in the Lord. Psalm 112, 7, verse 2. When I was a child, I talked like a child, thought as a child, and reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. 1 Corinthians 13:11. And then lastly, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there is any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. Psalm 139, 23 to 24. Yeah, if you're hearing that, you're like, but I battle anxiety, and I battle those anxious thoughts, and I'm it's not as easy as just not doing it. One, I definitely get that, but this is about how, and I'm really surprised that wasn't in there. Our battles are not against flesh and blood. There's a great verse, and I am now drawing a blank on it. But, the battle starts in our minds, right? So when you feel those anxieties coming up, give it to God. He's not necessarily going to take it, but he'll help you carry it. And I think that's one of those big things. And when we are able, try not to obsess on things. Focus on what is good and pleasing and praiseworthy, like what we talked about in the last book that we read together. And focus on those things when you can. And that's a good way and a good practice of helping us not get obsessed and turning these thought practices into idols. A lot easier said than done. And, I've fallen trap and victim to some of that stuff that we just talked about. For sure. And a lot of times I got to stop and pray. And just kind of try to get those selfish thoughts out of my head, I shared the other day with the one driver, and then I was like, okay, no, get out of my own head. They didn't actually do anything wrong. It's me projecting because of my negative state of mind. So I need to step back. So I think there's some value in there, even though it made it just sound like, well, stop doing it. And that's not helpful to just say, hey, stop doing it. But there is some good things in there when we're able, and even when those come, try to focus and change our thought patterns. I think that can go a long way. By the way, welcome, Ryan. We're going to start reading 1 Samuel chapter 14. pop in a glass, by the way, is just something that I love. The first time I ever had it really was on a missions trip and to Haiti. And I always get reminded of serving God when I'm drinking pop out of a glass. I really like it. Plus, it's good for the environment. Better for the environment. Yeah. Anyways, so 1 Samuel, chapter 14 is where we're going to be going. The story so far is the war with the Philistines has been continuing. And Saul got desperate and he took a few matters into his own hands, and Samuel let him know, like, hey, that's not cool. You were supposed to be serving God, and now you've started serving yourself. You've started serving your fear. You started serving all that stuff. And your kingdom's going to come to an end. And God is already rising up someone from birth who will be your successor. And then Israel's at a massive military disadvantage in this war. They have to essentially go to their enemy and pay their enemy to sharpen their farm equipment. And the only two people with swords in all of Israel are King Saul and his son Jonathan. That's it. They're the only people with swords. So, military, they are at a massive disadvantage, going up against armies with armor, with swords, with shields, and you got sticks and dull farming equipment. And that's kind of where Israel's at, and it laid it out how much it costs to go and get your shovels and your plowshares. Like it costs like this much of an ounce of gold or this much of an ounce of silver to just get your thing sharpened from the enemy, which is crazy. So the Amorites and all those other people that are like, yeah, we can definitely oppress these people. We could bring them in. But like for these people that weren't a threat, one of the questions that's come up for me is, why did the Amorite king hate Israel so much that he was like, cool, let's take all the Jewish people and gouge out their right eye. And let's continue to conquer them, gouging out their right eye. What kind of hate was in his heart for these people to do that? And the Jewish people throughout history have had a lot of hate just come their way for seemingly almost no reason, misplaced blame. And it's crazy. Anyways, that's just a thought that came to my head while doing this. But to go back to the story, they don't have any blacksmiths because they were afraid that, if they get blacksmiths, then they can rise up against us. And now we're going to continue with with Jonathan and his daring plan in 1 Samuel chapter 14. One day, Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Come on, let's go over to where the Philistines have their outpost." But Jonathan did not tell his father what he was doing. Meanwhile, Saul and his 600 men were camped on the outskirts of Gilboa, around the pomegranate tree at Maragon. Among Saul's men was Ahijah, the priest, who was wearing the ephod, the priestly vest. Ahijah was the son of Ichabod, brother of Ahitub, and son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord, who had served at Shiloh. No one had realized that Jonathan had left the Israel camp. To reach the Philistine outpost, Jonathan had to go down between two rocky cliffs that were called Bozo and Sineth. The cliff on the north was in front of Michmash, and the one on the south was in front of Gibeah. Let's go across the outpost of those pagans, Jonathan said to his armor bearer. Perhaps the Lord will help us, for nothing can hinder the Lord. He can win a battle whether he has many warriors or only a few. Do what you think is best, the armor bearer replied. I am with you completely, wherever you decide. All right then, Jonathan said. Told him. We will cross over and let them see us. If they say to us, stay where you are or we'll kill you, then we'll stop and not go up to them. But if they say, come up and fight, then we'll go up. That will be the Lord's sign that he will help us defeat them. When the Philistines saw them coming, they shouted, look! The Hebrews are crawling out of their holes! Then the men from the outpost shouted to Jonathan, come up here and we'll teach you a lesson. Come on, climb right behind me, Jonathan said to his armor bearer, for the Lord will help us defeat them. So they climbed up, using both hands and feet, and the Philistines fell before Jonathan and his armor bearer, killed those who came behind them. Sorry, I want to read that again because I feel like I messed that up. Verse 13. So they climbed up, using both hands and feet, and the Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer killed those who came behind them. They killed some 20 men in all, and their bodies were scattered over about half an acre. Suddenly, panic broke out in the Philistine army, both in the camp and in the field, including even the outposts of raiding parties. And just then, an earthquake struck, and everyone was terrified. Israel defeats the Philistines. Bo, bo, bo. Continuing verse 16. Saul's outlooks in Gilboa of Benjamin saw a strange sight. A vast army of Philistines began to melt away in every direction. Call the roll and find out who's missing, Saul ordered. And when they checked, they found that Jonathan and his armor bearer were gone. Then Saul shouted to Ahijah, bring the ephod here. For at that time, Ahijah was wearing the ephod in front of the Israelites. But while Saul was talking to the priests, the confusion in the Philistine camp grew louder and louder. So Saul said to the priests, never mind, let's get going. Then Saul and all his men rushed out to battle and found the Philistines killing each other. There was a terrible confusion everywhere. Even the Hebrews, who had previously gone over to the Philistine army, revolted and joined with Saul, Jonathan, and the rest of the Israelites. Likewise, the men of Israel who were hiding in the hill country of Ephraim joined the chase when they saw the Philistines running away. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle continued to rage even beyond Beth Avel. Saul's foolish oath. Now, the men of Israel were pressed to exhaustion that day, because Saul had placed them under an oath, saying, let a curse fall on anyone who eats before evening, before I have full revenge on my enemies. So no one ate anything all day, even though they had all found honeycomb on the ground in the forest. They didn't dare touch the honey, because they all feared the oath they had taken. But Jonathan had not heard his father's command, and he dipped the end of his stick into a piece of honeycomb, ate the honey. After he had eaten it, he felt refreshed. But one of the men saw him and said, your father made the army take a strict oath that anyone who eats food today will be cursed. That's why everyone is wary and faint. My father has made trouble for us all, Jonathan exclaimed. A command like that only hurts us. See how refreshed I am now that I have eaten this little bit of honey? If the men had been allowed to eat freely from the food they found among our enemies, Think how many more Philistines we could have killed. They chased and killed the Philistines all day from Michmash to Erijon, growing more and more faint. That evening, they rushed for the battle plunder and butchered the sheep, goats, cattle, and calves, but they ate them without draining the blood. Some reported to Saul, "Look, the men are sinning against the Lord by eating meat that still has blood in it." "That is very wrong," Saul said. "Find a large stone and roll it over here. Then go among the troops and tell them, 'Bring the cattle, sheep, goats here to me. Kill them here and drain the blood before you eat them. Do not sin against the Lord by eating meat with blood still in it.'" So that night, all the troops brought their animals and slaughtered them. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord, and it was the first of the altars he built to the Lord. Saul said, "Let's chase the Philistines all night and plunder them until sunrise. Let's destroy every last one of them." His men replied, "We'll do whatever you think is best." But the priest said, "Let's ask God first." So Saul asked God, "Should we go after the Philistines? Will you help us defeat them?" But God made no reply that day. Then Saul said to the leaders, "Something's wrong. I want all my army commanders to come here. We must find out what sin was committed today. I vow by the name of the Lord who rescued Israel that the sinner will surely die, even if it's my own son Jonathan." But no one would tell him what the trouble was. Then Saul said, "Jonathan and I will stand over here, and all of you stand over there." And the people responded to Saul, "Whatever you think is best." Then Saul prayed, "O Lord, God of Israel, please show us who is guilty and who is innocent." Then they cast sacred lots, and Jonathan and Saul were chosen as the guilty ones, and the people were declared innocent. Then Saul said, "Now cast lots again and choose between me and Jonathan." And Jonathan then was shown to be the guilty one. "Tell me, what have you done?" Saul demanded of Jonathan. "I tasted a little honey," Jonathan admitted. "It was only a little bit at the end of my stick. Does that deserve death?" "Yes, Jonathan," Saul said. "You must die. May God strike me and even kill me if you do not die for this." But the people broke in and said to Saul, "Jonathan has won a great victory for Israel. Should he die? Far from it. As surely as the Lord lives, not one hair on his head will be touched, for God helped him do a great deed today." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he was not put to death. Then Saul called back the army from chasing the Philistines, and the Philistines returned home. Saul's military success. Now, when Saul had secured his grasp of Israel's throne, he fought against his enemies in every direction, against Moab, Aram, Edom, and the king of Zobah, and the Philistines. And wherever he turned, he was victorious. He performed great deeds and conquered the Amorites, saving Israel from all those who had plundered them. Saul's sons, including Jonathan, Ishbosheth, and Melchishah. He also had two daughters, Miriam, who was older, and Michal. Saul's wife was Anoam, and Ananom, and the daughter of Amazaz, Ahamaz. The commander of Saul's army was Abner, and the son of Saul's uncle Ner. Saul's father Kish and Abner's father Ner were both sons of Abel. The Israelites fought constantly with the Philistines throughout Saul's lifetime. So whenever Saul observed a young man who was brave and strong, he drafted him into his army. May God add a blessing to the reading of his word. So there's a few things in here. Hi, Tracy and Langley. Thank you for joining. That really jumped out to me. The people were looking to their leader and they were saying, whatever you think is best. Should we do this? Whatever you think is best. They trusted Saul. And Saul, we saw his greed and him wanting to take things into his own hands in the last chapter. And Samuel was like, yeah, well, that's not going to be good. You do that, and you're going to get replaced. And you're already heading down this path. And he started to treat his own word as God. Saul is now starting to put himself in the position of God. Like, you broke an oath that I forced other people to make, and you didn't make it. Now you deserve to die. It's like, I didn't even know that was a thing, Dad. Like, you want to kill me? And the people stood up because they finally saw this injustice happening. Saul's word, like, it has its limitations, and people are starting to see that. They're starting to see, okay, yeah, God appointed you, and you're getting these victories, and you're doing these great things for Israel, but, like, there's something off. And they're starting to see that a little bit. But he's still claiming victories. And thankfully, the people stood up and stood to protect Jonathan in that case. Because, like, he was guilty of breaking something he didn't realize he was breaking. Which I think is fairly significant for a lot of things. And God understands that. But also, when God stopped talking to Saul, he instantly wanted to blame someone else. He's like, all right, whose fault is this? And it came back to Saul. It came back to Saul and Jonathan. And God, I think, as I'm reading this, was exposing that Saul was willing... He was willing to pay a super high price to maintain power. This is the first time where he's like, not only are you saying that your word is better than my word, that your actions are better than my actions, but you're willing to kill one of the most precious things in your life. You're willing to let your son pay for your ego. And thankfully the people stepped up and they're like, no, he claimed a victory. We're not going to kill him. Like, what's wrong with you, Saul? But he kept on getting people to join the army, and Saul, the army was growing and things were growing. I'm assuming that they might have got blacksmiths by now. It hasn't addressed that yet. At least not on that day. And because of Jonathan going through, and Jonathan still came up with this plan, did some action, but he was still trying to get God's guidance while he was doing it. And which is a big thing. So as God, it's like, all right, we're going to go forward. We're going to do this, that, and the other. Like, seek God's guidance still. Don't just be like, all right, cool. He said, let's do this. And then you just kind of go and do it, and you don't never lean on God. And Saul, at this point too, when the people are like, whatever you think is best, we're going to do. There's a little bit of trusted due diligence, especially with the Israelite people. They're trusting that you're praying and that you're relying on God to guide us in that leadership. And before I start up any of these live stream devotionals, I pray. And I pray for God's guidance, direction, that he can speak through me to you, and that he can, I always turn to God first. Doesn't mean that I'm always perfect. It doesn't mean that I don't have my own ego come through sometimes. But I try to have God's guidance, especially during this time, because this is an important time for sure. And one where I just don't want my own words to come through. I want God's intent and purpose and words and love and hope and challenge to come through. I also like just the fact that the people weren't guilty, I think, is a pretty big sign for trusting their leaders. Doesn't mean that they might not have been consequence free, but in this moment, it's really emphasizing the fact that leaders should be held at a bit of a higher account. If you're in a position of leadership, there should be a little bit more of a purpose. If you're leading people into things that are not of God, that are wrong, then that onus is on you. There's also onus on them for following through with things that are wrong. But if you've convinced them that you're God or you're representing God, and in which case Saul was appointed by God, there is reason for that. And then Saul makes them make pointless oaths that actually end up hurting them, and he's misguided and he's selfish, and now he's starting to have ego work in. Things are getting a little bit desperate for them, but they're also winning wars, so they're kind of like, okay, it's interesting. I know it's going to come in a couple chapters, but that's going to have to wait till next week. Next week, we're going to have the third main character enter into the story. And obviously, no, that's not Jonathan, but it will be David. So we'll be introduced to David next week. But for now, let me pray for you and let you get back to your weekend. It looks like it's really nice weather. If you're going for a walk, remember to wear a mask as you're going out there. Protect yourself, protect others. And let's keep our new infections low, because we have been rocking it in Dufferin County. So thank you guys for helping to keep us all safe. And AJC, awesome Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for today. Thank you that the sun's shining, that we could take 30 minutes out, an hour out, however long it's been, to read your word, to get lessons from whatever BC, to Jonathan's words being recorded as he's going through things, and Saul doing things, and the people going, whatever you think is best, you're our king, whatever we think is best. We're learning how to be subjects to an earthly king. We're so used to a heavenly king. We don't know. I thank you that even though we continually make some of those same mistakes time and time again, Lord, I pray that you can guide us and direct us, that we can lean on your guidance and your direction as we move forward and tell us to go, do, be. Help us lean on your direction and your guidance. Let us seek justice but love mercy, and to walk humbly with you, Lord. Help us to seek justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with you. And Lord, I lift up our leaders. I lift up our leaders within the church during this time, as there's a lot of new church pastors coming into this, that, and the other. Lord, I pray that for the people that attend churches digitally, in person, whatever, that they can feel connected to you and to each other, but to you first and foremost. Lord, I thank you for all of our local church leaders. And I pray that you can help guide and direct them as they try to focus on what to write, how to lead. I pray that you can guide and direct them, and I pray for everyone in their flocks. Lord, I lift up our leaders in local government. I thank you for that, and our modern day kings, as in our prime ministers and our presidents, and I lift them up to you as well. I pray that ego, finance, all of that stuff can be put to the side, and what's good and right can be at the forefront of their minds. May you in your guidance, direct and guide them. And I thank you for all the ways that you direct and guide us. And I thank you that the people just didn't sit there and kill Jonathan, but they were like, no, that's what? No, Jonathan, he claimed a great victory. What are you talking about, Saul? Let us not just follow blindly, accusing or giving excuses for things that are obviously wrong. Help us to call out the wrong that our leaders do and give them the ears to hear and correction when it needs to be corrected. And I thank you that Jonathan got to live because the people were in tune with who you are. Not what was legally right, but what was morally right under your law, Lord. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me. Have a fantastic weekend. I encourage you to check out a local church tomorrow. I'm going to be live streaming The Well over Facebook, but there is a bunch of churches with a bunch of great online things. If you want help in finding a church for you, send me a private message. I'd love to help you find a church that'll be great for you. But for now, I will bid you a good day. Have a great weekend, and God bless.